welcome to another episode of Moment of Tiki, coming to you not from the Lagoon of Mystery, my home tiki bar in Central Texas, but the fabulous French Quarter in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today, we've got a special treat for you because I am taking you into the legendary Latitude 29 Tiki Bar, established and proprieted by none other than the legendary Jeff Beachbum Berry. Come on. We are here today at Latitude 29 in the French Quarter of New Orleans with the legendary Jeff Beachbum Berry, proprietor, and honestly, the reason any of us are enjoying good tiki drinks now, because as he has been described before as the Indiana Jones of tiki drinks, he is the gentleman who is responsible for uncovering many of the vintage original recipes from Don the Beachcomber, Stephen Crane's Luau, all of the great recipes that had atrophied and been lost in the 70s and 80s. So we are able to enjoy the tiki renaissance and drink quality beverages. Thank you for hosting me here today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Well, it's great. Latitude 29 is a destination for many tiki files. Here in New Orleans, you have great exposure with Tales of the Cocktail, bartenders coming from all over the country every year to experience it. But you are a Southern California native, are you not? And you grew up there and you were in the film industry as your original career. So I have to ask, and I've never really seen it explained anywhere, why New Orleans?
Okay. Well, it has to do with the film industry a little bit in that the work there dried up for my wife and I around 2007. And at that point, it's like, well, we don't have to be in LA anymore if we're not in this business, because there's, it's expensive and it's not the most pleasant place in the world. So we started looking for other places to move to. And nothing was screaming out at either of us. And we were both fairly well traveled, but for some reason, neither of us had been to New Orleans. And in the summer of 2005, I got invited to one of the first Tales of the Cocktails, I think it was the second year or something like that, to co-host a cocktail dinner. And we stepped off the shuttle in the French Quarter, the airport shuttle. And it's like, where the hell has this place been all our lives? This is amazing. There's Juilliard-trained musicians playing on the street. The architecture is amazing, whereas everything in LA had just turned into overdeveloped big box stores and ugly condos and sort of choking with traffic. So you had the architecture, you had the music, you had the culture, you had the cuisine. I mean, New Orleans is the only city in the United States with its own cuisine, Creole cuisine. I mean, you can't really say that about any other city in the country. So the cocktail scene was great. And more important than all of that, the people were really cool. I mean, they were the anti-LA. If you've spent any time in the film business, you realize that it's entirely driven on all the worst aspects of the mind. It feeds on insecurity, paranoia, Schadenfreude. It's not enough for you to succeed. Your best friend has to fail, and it's hyper competitive, and you don't really make a whole lot of friends. I had some very close acquaintances in the movie business, but I don't think I had any real friends. And then this was the 180 degrees from that. Like, everyone we met had a whole different mindset. They all wanted to help each other. This is a small town, so everybody here wants everybody else to succeed, so the town can survive and they can stay here because of all the wonderful things that it offers. And I wasn't used to that. I mean, I was used to people giving me bad information so that I'd screw up, and everybody here was giving me basically gold. I was a little suspicious at first. The most famous bar owner here, Neil Bodenheimer, when he found out we were going to open, took me aside and said, here's what you need to do. The bar needs to be this high off the ground. The lighting, the foot candle should be like this so people feel like they look better, and then you need to do this and that and the ergonomics. And I was sitting there listening and was thinking, is he telling me just really bad info so that I'll screw up and I won't be a competitor of his? And I said, no, it was pure gold. It was the kind of thing you'd charge a consultant hundreds of dollars an hour for, and everybody in town was like that. We shed our LA ways and adapted pretty quickly to that mindset. It's sort of a rising tide, well, unfortunate metaphor given what happened, but rising tide lifts all boats is kind of the mentality here. Sure enough, rising tide happened like right as soon as we decided to move here. Katrina happened, so that delayed us a little while. But we always knew we were going to move down here, and when we decided we were going to open a place, we always knew that it was going to be down here. And this is where the love was. This is where the talent pool was. This is where our friends were, basically. So it was kind of a no-brainer on that one.
So 14 years on, it's kind of worked out for you?
Yeah, we're still here. And the reason for that is Mrs. Bum, alias Anine K. Well, I guess Mrs. Bum would be your alias. Anine K, alias Mrs. Bum. She's the one who had the idea to open the place, who saw it through every stage of the way: permitting, construction, hiring, design, and she's the one who's kept it alive. I mean, she's really, really good at what she does, and she's had every job you can have in the service industry. So she knows exactly what's going on in every area of the place: kitchen, bar, post stand, et cetera, et cetera. And she's the one who basically steered the ship through COVID, through hurricanes, through economic downturns, through all kinds of stuff. And we're still here 12 years on.
It's great when you can leverage those family connections.
That's right.
So that leads directly into my next question, because you're here, right in the epicenter of the French Quarter.
Yeah.
You got the tall ships across the way. It's tourists. Let me try and phrase this without being incredibly stupid, but when you're opening a tiki bar in a high traffic, high tourism area that is not necessarily a high tiki bar, what approach do you take for that? Because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say 95% of your clientele have never stepped in a tiki bar before. So how do you approach that?
You would be right about that. Yeah. Basically, the first thing we had to do is convince people that, as you say, that it's not a bad business idea to open a tiki bar in the French Quarter. And we were lucky enough to speak to the manager of this hotel, who he'd worked in Chicago and been to the Trader Vic's there, and he'd seen high-end hotel bar restaurants in the tiki style. He knew that was a thing. And he was on board, but we had to convince the owner of the whole hotel and the Bienville House and the Monteleone. And to do that, we put together a proposal, and I only chose photographs to illustrate what we wanted to do based on those high-end Trader Vic style hotels. I used a lot of stills from London and from Beverly Hills and Emeryville, 3 locations that were actually kind of classy, kind of chic looking, lots of polished wood, no thatch, no beach bar stuff at all. And so we went for that look. And for me, it was an easy fit because being a tiki geek and collecting postcards and menus and going to these places over the years, looking at the Kon-Tikis that were all in Sheraton hotels and looking at the Vicks in the Hiltons, and you had another hotel chain in the Marriott's, Kon-Tiki, I believe it was. No, not Kon-Tiki. No,
it was Portugal and Kon-Tiki were both Stephen Crane.
Those were both Stephen Crane, yeah. It escapes my mind, but there were at least 3 big tiki chains that were in fairly high-end hotels. So it just seemed like a natural thing for me, and the guys said fine. So we did not think that they would be okay with it, but they were. So and here we are.
Yeah. So. It carries over. I mean, even looking at the ceiling, you have the grass cloth up there, and just it's sleek, not necessarily modern, but mid-century modern comes to mind. It has that 60s, late 50s aesthetic that's really clean.
Which is my preferred version of tiki.
Oh,
it's just like I like that because I like mid-century modern and I like tiki, and they did converge quite a bit, in the actual mid-century. The other thing about the design was, 95% of the people would never be in a tiki bar, but you know what happens when you go into your first tiki bar? I mean, you gotta love it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anybody who's been to a place, the kind of places we love, like who's been to the Maikai and didn't like it, didn't like the look of it. I mean, maybe you're going to get somebody from Boca Raton who says, "Oh, this is tacky," but I don't want them in here anyway. So it works out okay. Most people are happy. We had a couple on their honeymoon from Ireland. Shortly after we opened, they were sitting at the table over there by the window, and they were here 4 nights in a row. And I went over to them and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I talked to them for a little bit, found out that they were on their honeymoon. They'd never been to New Orleans before. They were very likely not going to be here again. And I said, "Well, there's a lot of other really great restaurants and bars, and you should experience." They go, "Yeah, but we like it here." And it was their first tiki bar.
Validation for you, man.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, so next I want to ask you, as the Indiana Jones of tiki drink cocktails, what approach did you take to building your menu here? Because you have classics, but then you have riffs on classics and other. How did you approach that?
That's a great question.
Knowing that everyone's going to look at you and have raised expectations.
Right. That's a great question, and it took me about 6 months to do. It wasn't simply a matter of cherry picking the recipes I liked out of the books and putting them on a menu. They were all too different and varied, or conversely, they were all too much the same. The first thing I did was I had to whittle down 300 recipes that I really liked from all the books into 30, no more than 30, because then the bartenders would be overwhelmed. Even 30 is pushing it, but that's most tiki bars in the classic mold had about that many drinks. So, TET has like 80 at this point, but those guys are ninjas. Anyway, first thing I did was I said, okay, I'm going to have one drink with one specific flavor profile, not 3 or 4 drinks with the same flavor profile. For example, if there was I'm going to have one passion fruit forward drink, not 5 drinks that have passion fruit.
Latitude 29.
Exactly.
That is your interpretation.
The menu.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Chief Lapu Lapu.
Okay, yeah.
So that's
and that was a riff on that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm talking to a pro.
Enthusiastic amateur.
Well, that's good enough for me. That's what I am at this point still. So actually, it was going from amateur to like pretend professional. That was the journey that the menu took me on. Okay, so that was the job. One coconut forward drink, one passion fruit forward drink, et cetera, all the way down the line. One ginger, so that you didn't have people making the complaint that they often do about a lot of tiki bars that all the drinks taste the same. Because let's face it, passion fruit's great. I got 30 passion fruit drinks and I could be happy, but Anyway, that was the first job. The second job was, it was 2012 by the time, when was it? 2014 when we opened. If we had opened when the first wave of neo-tiki craft cocktail bars were opening, and they were all using recipes from my books, we would have done the same thing they did and just run the classics. I would have been perfectly happy with a menu of nothing but Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic's greatest hits, and also the Kon-Tikis. But it was later than that, and there were a lot of these bars opening up, and I figured we had to cut through the chrome somehow, and we had to make ourselves stand out.
Sure.
And one of the ways of doing that was to come up with original drinks that you couldn't get anywhere else. I mean, you can go to 10 craft cocktail tiki bars around the country and get a zombie and a Navy Grog and a 151 Swizzle, but you could only get the Hawaii 504 here, you could only get this and that drink here. So I mixed it up with classics and new drinks. That was the second thing I had to do. Third thing was I had to develop systems, because the thing I had witnessed in a lot of tiki bars, new tiki bars, was that they were overwhelmed by the time it took to make the drink and the amount of ingredients. And I knew that if these guys and gals behind the bar were going to make the drinks in the specific amount of time, they had to be streamlined. So, as you know, being an enthusiastic amateur/professional, Don's drinks called for, and Vic's drinks that were flash blended called for different amounts of crushed ice in each drink to balance them out. Some drinks called for 4 ounces, some drinks called for 8, 6, etc.
And they paired with the specific beverage vessel, the glass, the mug. Yeah.
Right. Now, I didn't want our bar crew to have to try to remember that. On top of having to be off book and memorize the recipe, I didn't want them to have to memorize how much ice it took, and then to have 3 different size scoops. So I decided that since the zombie was 6 ounces of crushed ice, and it was never going to get better than that, I would respec all the other recipes from my books that were flash blended so that they balanced out at 6 ounces of crushed ice. So that we went to Restaurant Depot. I bought a 6 ounce long-handled ice scoop. All they have to do is put it in the crushed ice, level it off, put it in the blender. They don't have to think. Every drink that goes into the blender has the same amount of ice. So that's one example of systems. The other, of course, was pre-batching little things, like the zombie called for 12 drops of absinthe and a teaspoon of grenadine, and so I turned it into an undead mix with 3 or 4 ingredients, so they only have one touch.
No.
That one bottle, and they don't have to do 4 different little things, which would screw up the time it takes to make the drink.
That's what Don did with Don's mix.
Exactly. Yeah. He did this exact same thing. So no harm in that.
No.
Same thing with if there's 3 rums in the zombie, why don't we put them all in one bottle? I mean, in some states it's illegal to do that, but
yeah,
I don't even know if this is one of them. But anyway,
we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. This video will never play in New Orleans.
No, of course not.
So finally, I mean, and it ties into all the things I've been talking about. It was like 3-dimensional chess, the way that Spock and Kirk played it in Star Trek, in the original series.
Oh, yeah.
There are 3 levels. The first level is the same level, the only level I had to deal with in the books, which was, how do I make the best possible drink? That's it. If I want to use an $80 bottle of rum, if I want to take a half an hour laboring over the sink to build this thing, it doesn't matter. It's the best possible recipe that's going into the book. Well, that's level 1 for the menu. Level 2 is, how do I make the best possible drink in the least amount of time? And that's when all these systems had to come into play, and you had to think your way through streamlining the system. Level 3, okay, how do I make the best possible drink in the least amount of time for the least amount of money? I mean,
you're a businessman.
People are paying for these, and we're paying to make them. And there's a little thing I didn't know about before I was dragged into this business, which is pour cost. How much does it cost us to make the drink versus how much can we charge a customer for it? And in order to keep pour cost at a reasonable level, I had to change some ingredients sometimes. Again, never losing sight of how to make the best possible drink,
right? But
also with these other 2 caveats. The last part, which you part of your question was, people were going to be gunning for me as the guy who wrote the books. Is like, I knew that there's 2 drinks that had to be got right. The tiki people were going to judge us on the Mai Tai. The cocktail people and the rum people are going to judge us on our daiquiri. So those are the 2 drinks I spent the most time on. And they've got the highest pour cost. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. There's some drinks that don't cost much of anything. And bless anybody who comes in here and orders a vodka soda. We love you. It takes 5 seconds to make it. It doesn't cost anything. And we can finance the Mai Tai and on all the other highfalutin drinks we do. So I worked a long time on both of those to try. And the daiquiri was the biggest challenge because it's not that interesting a drink. It's basically spiked limeade, rum, lime, and sugar. That's it. So what became important was which rum. We spent more on this white rum because it had to have a higher ABV than 80 proof, because that just didn't taste like anything in the drink. And there weren't very many of them out there, and they cost more money, but it didn't matter. And then I had to come up with a blend of different sugars to dissolve in the drink, not sugar syrup. That gives the drink kind of most daiquiris you get are going to be made with sugar syrup, lime, and rum. And the syrup gives you a sort of a glycerin-y mouthfeel. Okay. But when you take, as the masters did in Cuba in the 20s and 30s, like Constantino Ribelagua Vert at La Florida, he actually put in the shaker a certain amount of sugar and dissolved it with lime. And it's not that big a deal. I mean, the same way you make an old-fashioned, basically. So you spend another 5-10 seconds doing that, and then you've got a very crisp mouthfeel on the drink, and it's much more alive, than using sugar syrup. Plus, sugar syrup is half water. So you're adding water to the drink, and you're cutting down on the taste as well. So all these, it took weeks to come. And so I came up with a blend of just basically organic cane sugar, white sugar, and then 3 parts of that and 1 part of Demerara sugar or turbinado, just to give it a little bit of a molassesy hit, give it a little bit more character. So that's the kind of shit that I spent 6 months doing before we opened.
Well, it paid off. So Latitude 29, you intentionally referenced Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic and the old upscale tiki experience. I got to ask you, do you really require your staff to sign NDAs?
Yeah, for the recipes? Yeah, we do. Yeah.
That's a throwback.
Yeah. It's just like, we don't put them in code, but we do. I don't know if Don had NDAs back in the day.
I don't think they existed.
Yeah, he would have used them.
Yeah, I wanted to see if you had bottles with codes on it back there, but I guess NDA cuts to the chase a little better, huh?
Yeah, it's not that hardcore.
But then again, you have shared a lot of the recipes through Imbibe and other places.
Yeah, I mean, the older I get, the looser I get about it, But when I was a little insecure when we first opened. Like, if the recipes are stolen, then we might lose market share. We might lose, the ability to survive. And now it's just like, no, we've been here a while. I think it's the same attitude Trader Vic had when he published his 1972 bar guide. At that point, it's like, hey, what have I got to lose? It's just like people are still coming to my restaurant, even if I do tell them what the recipes are. So I've been putting some of our recipes onto Total Tiki and Total Tiki Online, and giving magazines and newspapers some of them.
Well, it goes back to that. I mean, you can make any of these cocktails at home far cheaper.
Yeah.
But it just tastes better when you go out and you have someone else make it for you.
Well, and that's why atmosphere is so important too. I mean, and the other thing is, to your point, I don't want to spend 20 minutes making a drink when I'm home. I just want to, I'll just pour myself some straight rum or whiskey on the rocks. That's about as mixological as I get at home, So the only time I ever drink these drinks is when I'm at a tiki bar. Let them do all the work.
Well, because you're normally a bourbon guy, right?
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm shocked. Okay, you heard it here first, folks, right here.
It's an exclusive. The cat's out of the bag, or the old crow's out of the bag.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I used to make them at home before we opened a place, but now I don't have to. So it's like I'd rather have these guys do it.
You first made it at home because nobody else could make them.
Exactly, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes many trips to many different stores to find the ingredients and get them, and make sure that you have everything when you want that drink. I can't tell you how many times I said, I'm going to have a Mai Tai tonight, and then I look around and I don't have any orgeat syrup, or I don't have any Martinique rum. It's not going to taste as good. So you just,
Well, and that's how much the scene has changed since you first got interested, because you can go anywhere and get multiple choice for allspice dram.
Yeah.
You can get Luxardo, maraschino liquor.
Yeah.
All of these esoteric ingredients, they're commonplace now.
Well, the funny thing is that we used to have to make our own allspice dram back in the day. There's a guy his tiki name is Kuku Ahu. He lives in the Midwest, and I believe he was a carpenter or something like that. But he came up, he MacGyvered a homemade recipe when we just couldn't find it anywhere, and it was delicious. But it took you 2 weeks because it had to macerate,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, with the cocktail renaissance, all these lost ingredients started being made again. I mean, pimento dram, allspice liquor was always being made in Jamaica. You just couldn't get it here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing that there's more than one brand out there, whereas before it was a complete drought.
Yeah.
It's like.
Beachbum berry remixed. Excuse me. Beachbum berry remixed.
I get all choked up when I think about it.
I know. It was the second tiki book I ever bought. And since then I've gotten Taboo Table. But when I got to Sippin Safari, and especially Potions of the Caribbean, I'm not trying to blow smoke here or anything, I was blown away, because previously you had written recipe books with a little bit of history in them. With Sippin Safari and Potions of the Caribbean, you have written history books with recipes.
Exactly. The template changed entirely, yeah.
And it is, the accolades had come in over the years. So, there's nothing that I can tell you that you don't already know of people's opinions, but they were, I'm not going to say life-changing for me, but it dramatically shifted my perspective on tiki.
Okay.
On top of that, they were just so well written.
Well,
you did the research. I'm a writer too, and I've done research and everything. And so you did the research, you put in the work, and you saved the receipts. Whenever I run across someone who said Caribbean has nothing to do with tiki, I said, whoa, hold up there.
Right.
Hold up there. Tiki would not exist.
Basically, yeah.
Without the Caribbean. You look back on that. You didn't plan to write a library of tiki books when you started off, but when you get to this point now and look back at what you accomplished, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what do you see? Is there kind of a sense of what the heck was I thinking, or?
No, not at all. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. That's exactly what I was trying to do with Potions. The evolution of the books, they started out as just this little stapled, hand-done zine thing that I would give out to people who wanted to know how to make the drinks that I know how to make, which at the time in the mid-90s there weren't a lot of them. And one of these little booklets found its way up into a comic book publisher in San Jose, Dan Vado of Slave Labor Graphics. And he said, hey, do you want to turn this into an actual tiki cocktail book? It never occurred to me. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, why not? And again, this was my hobby. This is what I did for fun. It wasn't my idea to become a cocktail book writer at all, but it was like, okay, let's do this. This will be fun, and we can give it out to people so they can make the drinks.
And you can make a lot of money.
That never happened. That's why we had to open a restaurant. The money there was no money. There was no advances, nothing like that. It was like, it was just strictly for fun, and I thought it was really cool to have somebody put out in book form the little zine that Otto and I were doing, Otto von Stroheim.
Yeah.
And that was just all I was interested in at that point was documenting recipes. I was just trying to learn how to make the drinks. I was trying to learn what was in the drinks. And I happened to be, for once in my life, in the right place at the right time. Los Angeles in the 90s, a lot of the old timers who I interviewed for Sippin Safari were still around. And it was random when you ran into one. There's no internet or anything like that. But you could meet them and you could talk to them and you could sometimes get information. So by the time, every time I finished a book, I thought, well, that's the end of that, because I didn't have any more recipes. Like when I finished Grog, I thought, well, that was fun. But then I started finding more recipes. And it's like, oh, shit, now I've got more of them. We should do another book. So then we did Intoxica. And then no more drink recipes after that. It was like, I didn't know what was in Don's drinks. I didn't know what was in Kon-Tiki drinks. I didn't know all the big deal ones. I didn't know. And I thought, well, that's just lost stuff. I'm never going to find that out. So enough of the books. But then, in finding the recipes, I looked at a lot of restaurant guides. The Paul Wog's Guide to Southern California Restaurants, published in like 1970 something or other, and these little recipe guides would have restaurant guides, guides to restaurants, little restaurant reviews in book form. They would often have recipes, and most of the time you would get food recipes instead of drink recipes. But I had a lot of food recipes that I just didn't care one way or the other about, but it got to the point after researching Grog and Intoxica that so many books, like the Diners Club cookbook would have like a drink section, and some of them would be tiki drinks, and then there would be a lot of Polynesian restaurant things. So I was like, well, I could do another book, just put all these recipes out there, the food recipes, and that was going to be the last book. That's it. Just it's done. I move on and try to be Stanley Kubrick again. Forget about this drink stuff. But then I started to meet, as I mentioned earlier, some of these old timers, and I would interview them, and the only thing I cared about was recipes, and they had the keys to they had the secret knowledge. They had the little grimoire. They had the recipe books. That's all I cared about. So I would be interviewing someone like Bob Esmino, and he'd be telling me about how he was a teenage guerrilla fighter in the Philippines when his family went there on vacation and World War II broke out and they were stranded. And I'd be going, yeah, but what's in spices number 4? But gradually it sunk into my head, wait a minute, that's an amazing story. And then the amazing story about how he went to work for the Kon-Tikis and met all these movie stars and blah, blah, blah. And the same thing with everybody else I interviewed. They all had amazing stories. And so that's when it finally occurred to me, penetrated my thick skull, that's the book. And the recipes that they were giving me, which formerly were my main raison d'etre, they would be sidebars. And that's how that template came to be. And it was, of course, the template I stuck with for potions. But potions was even more of a bear to wrestle with because, as a writer, you know that Sippin was a matter of structure. It's a matter of structuring it so that the timeline is revealed, and so you don't dump a bunch of exposition in the first chapter as you spread it all out. Life story of Don spread out over all these chapters because he intermixed with a lot of these people who I'm profiling. Potions was, I originally wanted it to be the last chapter of Sippin, where the last part of the safari was to go into the Caribbean from Florida. And there was just too much going on there, and I didn't understand the context of it. I didn't know anything about the Caribbean, and I thought, well, that's, I'm not going to bother with that. The only reason that book happened was because I ran across, after a lot of trial and tribulation trying to find her, I'll spare you that story, Colette Shalom, who is Joe Shalom's daughter, the guy who invented the Suffering Bastard and the Tropical Itch, among many other cocktails, whose life story was amazing, went from Cairo to San Juan to Havana, and he was escaping revolutions everywhere he went, and his life story was also amazing. And as she was telling that to me, he was like, oh man, I wish I had this for a Sippin Safari. This would have been the chapter 8. I could have pulled everything into focus using him. And I thought, well, that's just one chapter. I can't write another book. That's all I got on the Caribbean. But then, being the collector geek, I had postcards from Trader Vic's in the Caribe Hilton in San Juan. It's like, oh, and he was also in the Havana Hilton. So I could write about Trader Vic. I've never really written about Vic before. It was all about Don and everybody. So that's 2 chapters, and it kind of went from there. And then as it was going from there, I realized that so much of it was set in Cuba, and Cuban history in the 20th century was such a tangled, messy web of revolutions and counter-revolutions and this and that and the other thing. And I had to sort all that out because it was very confusing. And I had to sort it out in order to write about the drinks and the people who were drinking them and making them, because you had to give historical context to all this. In order to provide context for what I really wanted to write about, which was 20th century Caribbean stuff and Tiki's involvement with it, I had to explain what happened before, and I had to go all the way to 1492 to really unpack all of the really hardcore, messy, bloody history of the Caribbean that led to the daiquiri, for example. It didn't just happen. It happened because of certain historical causes. The way that I could justify writing about all this historical stuff, like the age of piracy, the age of conquest before that, then the colonial, sort of like slave labor colonies.
Sugar trade.
Sugar islands trade and all that. I would approach that through the prism of what all these people involved in those things were drinking. The plantocracy punches and the neguses and all that, and then Columbus discovering local maize beers and distillates from the hubo that the indigenous people were doing. And even the conquistadors encountered, like chocolate, for example, which nobody knew about in the old world until they encountered it in Mexico. So that just became this huge 4-year bear, and it's all because of Joe Shalom.
It's all his fault.
It's all his fault. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been getting close to a decade since Potions came out. Do you have any other? I know you stepped away from the whole, famous author gig for a bit. Do you have any other books in you? I do. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to write them. And there's a combination of factors that are determining that. One is there's way too much work for a bum now with all the tiki festivals going on and all the cocktail festivals and all the speaking gigs and all the. I've been doing a lot of recipe work for the Omni Hotel chain and for the Holland America cruise ship line and things like that. And then there's Sippin Santa, which takes up a lot of my time, which is the thing we do with Cocktail Kingdom, the tiki Christmas pop-up bars. You have to do all the recipes for that and everything. So there's really no time to write. I mean, the best time for me to write was when I was completely unemployable, which is the years that I was writing Potions. I couldn't have written Potions if I actually had a side gig. I was like, and I was just watching my bank account dwindle and my credit card bills rise, but there was nothing else for me to do aside from that, I always wanted to do a sequel to it called Potions of the Pacific. Ooh, okay.
Again, that would be another through the centuries kind of thing. It wouldn't just be tiki drinks in Hawaii and Tahiti. It would be the entire Rim of Fire, I believe it's called. You've got from Australia up through Japan. Talk about that. Talk about what was going on in the Pacific Northwest with the
Singapore, Thailand,
with the First Nations there. And, all that. And then all the way down the west coast of South America. And also you could do the Barbary Coast, like
do
San Francisco
and all that. Oh, that sounds like a tasty project.
Yeah, I mean, the recipes. What discouraged me was the recipes really weren't there. There weren't a whole lot of brilliant cocktails because cocktails were basically they thrived in Cuba and in Puerto Rico, and they world-class nightlife, and you didn't really have that in most of the Pacific. And now Dave Wondrich, the great James Beard Award-winning cocktail scholar, he's found a lot of interesting cocktails from Japan. Between the wars cocktails, and he's found other things. And I've started to find some stuff, but the fact, I don't know if I'm going to have time to do it. And also, there's no money in it. There was no money in Potions, really, but luckily Cocktail Kingdom was willing to bankroll it, and they did a beautiful job on it. So I'm just happy that exists at this point.
Well, you mentioned the recipe hunts. I got to ask, out of all these decades now that you've been chasing, are there any white whales out there? Any classic recipes that you've come across that you still haven't been able to crack the code on, that you're still open to finding? Yeah,
there's some obscure stuff, but who knows how brilliant it might have been. When Don Beach moved to Hawaii and opened his place in '48, he came up with a lot of new drinks. I guess maybe out of spite because of the nasty divorce.
Maybe out of spite.
differentiate himself from the mainland beachcombers. But he had things on his menu like the Cannibal Grog and the Governor General and all these other things, and I have no idea what's in those, and I'd like to know.
As the closest we have to a definitive authority, when it comes to Don Beach cocktails, how many of the classic Don Beach cocktails do you think were actually created by Don, and how many were created by his Filipino bartenders?
Oh, I think he created them all.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I do. I mean, Ray Bowen claimed that he and his fellow workers invented them, but there's every reason, if you look at the recipes that Don did, he had a style. He definitely had a style. And he was an innovator in a way that there were no... yes, Filipinos put rum in coconuts, yeah, sure, and in pineapples, and sure, they made their own palm wine and things like that. But the level of artistry that he did, and also the fact that he based everything on Caribbean drinks, which the Filipino community would not have had any prior knowledge of when they emigrated from the Philippines. I don't see it. Now, can I be 100% certain of that? No. And when you look at Mariano Liquidine, who worked in the Chicago Beachcombers from 1930s through World War II and into the 1950s, if you look at his old notebooks, which his son was kind enough to let me have a glance at one night at the Maikai, he's working on his own recipes. One of which became the Black Magic, and he's coming, and another of which became the Moon-Kissed Coconut. And you could see the bones of these things being formed. These were all early versions. So it's also probably silly to think that none of these bartenders were not working on their own things. And it's entirely possible that Don co-opted some of the recipes, or bought them, or maybe just ripped them off. I don't know. I wasn't there, but all I can do is read the tea leaves of his recipes, and there's a definite style, and that style really has nothing to do with Filipino cocktails before the end of Prohibition, at least. So,
I've got one more question,
yes, sir.
And then I'll let you get back to business world. In tiki circles, Beachbum Berry is a celebrity. You are modern day tiki royalty.
Well, we swim in a very small pond. but
be that as it may.
Yeah.
Where does Beachbum Berry end and Jeff Berry begin?
That's a great question, Jamie. And I pondered that question because I don't really even know anymore. The whole thing was just a joke. When I did the Grog log, the first Xerox zine version, I was cutting out, I was Xeroxing record album fonts that I thought were cool, or match fonts that were restaurant fonts for menus that I thought that were cool. And for some stupid reason, I thought that every drink needed to have its own font. Like the Cobra's Fang needed to have a snake font, and so I would Xerox those, cut them out, cut out the letters, and if I didn't have certain letters, I would have to try and pen and ink them. And then you tape them together, and then you use whiteout to get rid of the tape lines, and then you put that over the recipe, and you re-Xerox it, and it's good enough for
really high tech stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So by the time it came time to do the title page, the Grog log by Jeff Berry, I was just totally over it. And I was looking through the fonts, and I found one for a restaurant in Redondo Beach called Beachbum Bert's. And there's the same guy, Bert Hickson, who owned the warehouse. This is a really cool font. It looks like it was drawn in the sand by Robinson Crusoe or something like that. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I can't get Jeff Berry out of this, but it's Beachbum Bert's. All the letters are there for Berry. I just have to make the Y with a little magic marker. If I call myself Beachbum Berry, I can just take the entire thing Beachbum and tape it on, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I thought, who's going to see this thing? At the time, there were 10 tiki files in the world that I knew about, and it was just like, who's going to see it? It's just a joke, and that was the 1995 zine version.
Yeah.
And then it got to Dan, and he did his version, and we just kept it at Beachbum Berry, and I thought, no big deal. And now, look where we are. It's, Jack Nicholson once said that like 80% of acting is wardrobe. So I don't know who Jeff Barry is. I've never really known who I am. I mean, and that's something for psychoanalysis, which I can't afford. So, but I do know who Beachbum Barry is. When I put on the shirt and the hat and all that, I'm basically, I get it. I get why Victor Bergeron became Trader Vic. I get why Ernest Raymond, Beaumont Gant became Don the Beachcomber. It's easier to play a character than to be yourself in front of people, because people may not like you, but this cartoon character is fine. So and it's actually easier for me to do the kind of things I have to do as Beachbum Barry than it is as Jeff Barry. For example, coming out to the restaurant and touching tables and saying, "How is everything tonight, sir, madam?" That I would be terrified to do that if I wasn't dressed like this and I was coming at it cold. Same thing when I'm talking, giving seminars at like Tiki Oasis to like 300 people. I mean, it's a lot easier when I'm just wearing some silly outfit, and not that I love these kind of clothes. We all do, but it's easier for me to do it in character. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for putting up with me this evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You asked some great questions.
And if anyone is ever in New Orleans, you got to check out Latitude 29. So next time, from the Lagoon of Mystery or Latitude 29 or wherever I may be, aloha.